Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube channel. Marvin Elequin here with another episode of Dynasty Rankings versus ADP. And if you followed along over the last couple of weeks and months, you've noticed that I've generally given you guys 3 players at each position that I value higher than ADP. Well, we're going to change that a little bit. We're going to focus on 1 player per episode, but instead of giving you guys a high-level overview, we're going to dive a little deeper into that player's production, ecosystem, and dynasty outlook. So today, I have 1 quarterback here for you guys that I think is currently being undervalued in the dynasty community. And with that, let's dive in. So the quarterback that I want to focus on here today with you guys is Ryan Tannehill, Tennessee Titans quarterback, who's currently going as the QB14 in sleeper formats. In other formats and platforms, he's actually going a little later than that. And in my rankings, I have him as my dynasty QB11. So why is he a dynasty QB1 for me? Well, for one, he's only 32 years old, same age as Russell Wilson and Matt Stafford. And over the last 2 seasons, he has really turned his career around and has been on absolute fire from a fantasy perspective. In 2019, we know he took over mid-season for a Titans offense, igniting that Titans offense that was in desperate need for a spark. In the 10 games that he started in that season, in the 2019 season, he was the QB4 in quarterback points per game with 29.6, QB5 in touchdowns per game with 2.2, QB1 in yards per attempt with 9.6, and he also set a career-high touchdown percentage with 7.7. And one specific stat that I want to highlight for you guys is completion percentage over expected, or CPOE. This metric actually has a higher correlation to quarterback points per game than standard completion rate. And you guys can find this metric on several sites, but the one I'm going to specifically use is pulled from Next Gen Stats. It takes into account numerous factors to essentially calculate an expected completion rate based on different factors like down and distance, receiver separation, distance of nearest pass rusher, among other things. And if you compare the expected completion rate, a quarterback's expected completion rate, to their actual completion rate, you get CPOE. And this essentially measures a quarterback's efficiency relative to the difficulty of their passing attempts. And in 2019, Tannehill ranked as the QB1 with 8 percentage points above his expected completion rate. That's really impressive. That's higher than guys like Mahomes, Jackson, and Wilson. So a very, very efficient year in 2019 for Tannehill. So heading into 2020, the expectation was regression. Tannehill could never replicate his 2019 season, right? Well, the answer is yes, he didn't replicate it. He was hyper efficient that year. He was bound to regress a little bit, but his efficiency did decline, not necessarily to the mean. His touchdown percentage dropped to 6.9% in 2020, which is still above average. His CPOE, the metric we just talked about, dropped to 2.4, positive 2.4, which is still good for QB12 in 2020. So while his efficiency regressed, it was offset as well with just added opportunities with more pass attempts. Tannehill averaged about 7 attempts more per game. He was still the QB11 with 28.5 points per game in 2020, which is about a point less than his really efficient 2019 season. And to put his past 2 years really into perspective here and just how good he has been, Tannehill is up there with some of the elite fantasy quarterbacks. He's the QB2 over the last 2 seasons in touchdown percentage with 7.2%, only behind Lamar Jackson. QB2 in adjusted net yards per attempt with 8.1, only behind Pat Mahomes. QB2 in passer rating with 110.6, only behind Drew Brees. QB1 in game-winning drives, QB9 in fantasy points per game. And oh, by the way, he also has a rushing floor. He's been the QB14 with 16.1 rushing yards per game over the last 2 seasons. QB5 in total rushing touchdowns with 11. So he's no Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, but he still provides a boost with his rushing floor to his fantasy production. And that's what you want to see as well. So this all culminates to the same conclusion, really, is that he's been really good over the last 2 years. But what can we expect over the next year in 2021 and beyond that, in that 2 to 3 year window that we're looking at as dynasty managers? Well, I believe he can still be efficient and productive in this offense. And it starts with this offensive line. Tannehill had the 11th best O-line last year with a 5.5 adjusted sack rate per Football Outsiders. His offensive line core is locked at least until 2023, the majority of it at least. And they get their elite left tackle Taylor Lewan back this year after suffering a torn ACL mid-season in 2020. So that's going to be a big boost for him this coming season. So you really have this consistency with the offensive line. Now, if we shift to skill position players, it really doesn't get much better than what Tannehill has in this Tennessee Titans offense. He has a top-tier wide receiver who you guys may have heard of, A.J. Brown, who's locked in until 2023. He's a top Dynasty wide receiver and will be for years to come. Tannehill has also averaged 12.01 adjusted yards per attempt when targeting A.J. Brown. That's the highest rate among all wide receivers that Tannehill has ever played with. So that just shows that A.J. Brown is in a league of his own. He's very, very efficient and will be for this offense for 2021 and many years after that. We also have to look at the running back position. Derrick Henry, one of the better running backs in the league. He's locked in with his extension. He'll continue to be a threat in the backfield and provide a balance for this offense, which is really essential for Tannehill as well. So as far as changes go, we know that Arthur Smith is no longer the offensive coordinator. That's now Todd Downing, who's the former tight ends coach for this team. Arthur Smith is now with Atlanta. Well, a former offensive coordinator actually for the Raiders is Todd Downing. He was the offensive coordinator for that team in 2017. His offense was actually more the middle of the pack there, so nothing really to write home about. But what this tells me, this internal promotion for the Titans, is that Vrabel wants to continue to run a similar offense, which means the same balance, the same efficiency that we've seen over the last 2 years. They want to stick with what has worked over the last 2 seasons, which has really flourished into fancy production for this running game, for A.J. Brown, and for Ryan Tannehill. One thing to also keep an eye on here is the wide receiver core, the receiving core in general. Corey Davis is a free agent. We're not sure if he'll be back, but we just talked about A.J. Brown having the highest adjusted yards per attempt when targeted for Tannehill. Well, Corey Davis is second on that list with 10.9. So him leaving will affect Tannehill slightly. Jonnu Smith is a free agent as well. We know how efficient he was in the red zone. Adam Humphries was recently released. So they're losing a lot of pieces, but I do believe that they will reload this offseason, whether that be a free agent signing, a sneaky cheap free agent signing, or they might just draft someone in this loaded wide receiver class, maybe a Rondale Moore or an Elijah Moore, someone who can play in the slot and outside alongside A.J. Brown. So if we take a look at the full picture here for Tannehill, I believe he's set to dominate once again in 2021. And considering his mid QB2 ADP, he's someone who you guys can target in the later rounds if you can't grab an elite top-tier quarterback early. And if you do grab someone like Mahomes, Josh Allen, or Watson, Tannehill would be an excellent QB2 in Superflex leagues, because if the last 2 years have shown us anything, Tannehill has revitalized his career and has the upside to be an every week QB1 in this efficient Titans offense. All right, so that's all I have for this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and supporting. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this deeper breakdown of Ryan Tannehill and this Titans offense. And as always, be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and check out our site for even more content to help you guys navigate your Dynasty off season.